Not for posterity.
I see. Okay, got it. Well, I want to say thank you very much for the warm welcome I've received here. I appreciate it very much. The Fiction Collective was my first publisher back in 1981 with the book Heretical Songs. I started helping to run it around 85 through roughly 98 or so. And so I very much appreciate your efforts to keep that worthy cause alive. It was very interesting to go back into the archives here and look at all the books that I once had so much to do with. I was happy to think that the books had held up so well and that they had a lot of future to look forward to, a lot of readers to look forward to. So as you may have gathered, I have had two careers. One was, the first career was as a postmodern fiction writer, and the second career was as a culture critic. And there's a long story that kind of goes into how that second career happened, but I think I've been very fortunate in that regard, and I've enjoyed both aspects of the writing that I've done. What I want to read to you today will be fiction, and it will be from, because I haven't, the last 7 years it's just been Kurt White, Mr. Culture Critic, you know, and so I haven't really had much of a chance to think about fiction that I've already written, let alone writing new fiction. So this is a great opportunity for me in order to kind of go back and say, what stands up, what would I like to read to you from work that all feels kind of curiously distant at this point. But so I'm going to read to you from a book that it's called The Idea of Home, still in print with Dalkey. And it's a book that was first published by Sun and Moon Press in LA. But in the life of a writer, or at least in the life of this writer, there is a certain pattern, I think, for most of us. There are the pure learning books, the pure learning works, where basically you don't know who you are or what you're capable of, and you're just sort of trying to discover. Those books inevitably are the books that you're most embarrassed by later on, and I am embarrassed by my first two books in particular, although there's, I think, still some very good things in them, Heretical Songs and Metaphysics in the Midwest. But it wasn't until this book, which I wrote from 88 to 91 or so, somewhere in that area, that I sort of discovered what I wanted to do. I discovered the aesthetic idea that I wanted to create. And even there, though, there was a certain kind of learning process. Once I'd figured out who I was, what kind of book I wanted to write, and what kind of voice I wanted to use, there was still a learning process. So this was my first attempt at the book that I was meant to write. And another funny thing about being a writer, at least, is that you write all these books, but sometimes all the books are written just to get at this one book, just to do this one book right, completely right. And so this was the first, and there were 3 attempts at it. And I'm very happy with this book because I make my idea work here for the first time. But in 2 subsequent books, I made it work even better. The second one was Memories of My Father Watching TV. And then the third one that just got it so completely right that I said, well, I'm done with that. I'll have to reinvent myself, which I haven't managed to do yet, and that one is Requiem. But the idea basically is to write a highly architectural book that doesn't have a unifying plot, but that is nonetheless highly conceptually designed. It is completely thoroughly, there's nothing random about it at all. It may look random to you, it may feel random to you as you're reading it, but there's nothing random about its architecture, its structure, its form. But it's a novel of pieces, So there are lots of individual pieces that are sort of all over the place, but then the architecture of the book itself kind of brings them into a certain kind of coherence. So that was the idea that, that I wanted to create. And the other thing that I wanted to do in these books was I wanted them to be functioning in sort of the playful postmodern tradition, but I also wanted them to be deeply human. And this is something that my dear departed friend David Wallace and I shared. You know, we wanted to do things that were formally adventuresome and experimental, but in the end we wanted them also to speak in a very human way to our audiences. So this particular book, The Idea of Home, begins as a novel about that place that I grew up, which is a suburb of San Francisco called San Lorenzo. It was a vet village. In other words, it was like Levittown West, they called it. So a place where you had a lot of prefabricated stucco homes that all looked more or less the same. But it was the first home of a lot of returning veterans, of which my father was one. And so it started out as a book about that. Its ambitions became larger because what I became interested in was the idea that this prefab suburban thing was on the site of a certain kind of history, and that history had been completely obliterated. So especially obliterated was the presence of Indian, Native American populations and the original Mexican inhabitants of California. So, but there were curious little signs that they'd once been there, like even though this was a totally white, lower middle class suburb, all the streets were Spanish, you know? And so it was a sort of mystery that didn't occur to us, or to me, to be a mystery until much later when I said, yeah, why did they have all of these Spanish names for, like I grew up on Villa Andetta, why did they have, so that those names became a kind of clue to me that there was a history beneath the surface that was being forbidden to us. And so this book is a lot about uncovering history. And this particular book, I think you'll see this particular chapter is particularly about that process of uncovering the surface in order to find out what's beneath. And it's called Dig Here and You Will Find a Writing. And so it's narrated by this guy called Silkman. And it's punctuated by these little invocations, sort of like there was some sort of liturgical thing or a ceremonial thing, right? And so every once in a while you'll see me go invocation, and then I'll move into this completely strange voice. But there are little ways of punctuating the story. So it begins with an invocation.